Hello, everybody. It's Sascha here from Fudo Security on another podcast episode talking all things cybersecurity, info security. And today is a very special episode as I'm joined all the way from South Africa with Andrzej, who is the co-founder and operational director at Cybershure, who just happens to be a Fudo partner. Hello, Andrzej. Thanks for joining today.
Hi, thank you very much, Sascha.
So, I mean, with Cybershure and everything that you do, you're very much, I like this, you're very much a niche player, always looking for the advantages over what products can have and what certain products have over their competitors. So this is what garnered and started the whole conversation with Fudo Security. So on that subject, it's been a really, really intense week. It's always an intense time for security, but this week is just constantly something's going on, something big, something bigger the next day. So probably people have heard at this point about what Colonial Pipeline is. If you haven't, well then, I don't know where you live, but that's been a big news story in the cybersecurity world. And I think as we had also kind of chatted online, this very much, I think, one of those moments where the idea and contact of a cyber attack is very much affected the average person, in the nation, in the States.
That's very true.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at it, you may look back in time and see that this might have been an inflection point, which changes people's perceptions about the cybersecurity space. But with the shutting down of that pipeline, you saw on the news about 1,000 petrol stations ran out of fuel. Cars were queuing up to get in there. President Biden signing an executive order. It's just gone completely crazy. And the attackers, stated it was never their intention to hurt anybody. They just wanted to make money. And I think that brings us, great segue into ransomware. It's increasing. We're all seeing the research that's coming out recently. We're seeing the public announcements that are coming out of these large organizations that are suffering ransomware attacks. It's starting mainly in, I'd say, the developed world at the moment. So the US, Europe with Ireland, with their National Health Service. And then most recently, an interesting little angle where companies that suffer ransomware attacks that don't take into account, but the US Treasury has actually announced that if you are intending to pay, if you suffer from a ransomware attack and you are intending to pay, and you're US based at the moment, we don't know how far this spreads internationally, that you have to actually engage with them and get their permission to pay, because you could be falling foul of the OFAC regulations. Some of these organizations and players fall on the SDN list, which is a list of prohibited organizations or people. And, in your haste to save your organization or alleviate the queues at the petrol pump, you might be getting dinged by the US Treasury or their regulators for making a payment to an organization or an individual that's sitting in the wrong part of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very, very odd and more and more unfair situation, as you said, that you may very well, if the basic idea is just to get things back running, I want to pay these criminals, I'd like control back, that you may well suffer, as you just mentioned, this penalty that you are going to have to pay a fine, that who's been attacked, right? And this kind of brings this other topic, which is currently being considered around the world, is trying to actually outlaw and forbid and ban these kind of payments in the first place. So if you have your data, and it's now encrypted, and you've suffered this ransomware attack, and you can't get to it, and you're sitting there, and you're like, you just want to move forward. And okay, I'm not condoning and saying you should pay, but let's say some people will be stressed. It'll be a huge burden on their lives and their businesses that they want to get out of that. And now you're going to even burden them with extra fees, and might even burden them twice, as you said, with this list from the US Treasury. That's just US specific. And let's face it, that I think, and you mentioned the Ireland incident just now this week as well, the entire health system has suffered. I mean, they've done a good job in terms of being very forthright and honest and saying, okay, all of this is now going offline. So that is, if you can say, commendable on being really honest right away. But we've seen many clinics suffer. We've seen many clinics and hospitals suffer throughout the world, and particularly in the United States. There's that whole thing last year, what happened in Germany, and it's a very controversial point to make. But if people don't remember, I think it was around October time, where there was a female patient brought to a hospital, I think West Germany, in a city at a clinic, and that clinic had just suffered a ransomware attack, so they couldn't treat her. So the whole hospital was shut down, and they brought her somewhere else, several kilometers away. By the time she arrived there, tried to receive this emergency treatment, was too late. You could argue, I'm not a doctor, but I could imagine that her chances would have been higher had she been treated right away. And in medicine, every second counts. So now with that, we have a first unfortunate casualty. Now we have the whole pipeline mess. And as you said, the basic citizen knowing, oh, this is because of a cyber attack, right? So this makes it very, very real. And as you said, an inflection point where people will now say, okay, this does affect my life. So the big question is, Andrzej, will things get better?
I don't think so, Sascha. I think we're starting to see a steady increase in the various types of attacks. So your ransomware, your phishing, your vishing. And I think that they were always there to a greater degree, but they are starting to increase, and they're coming to the fore now because of what's happened with the pandemic, and more people are working from home or remotely. You're now having people dialing in or accessing, and most people don't realize that when you do that, you're going through your own modem at home, and most of them don't have any passwords, or they have default passwords on them and are very easy to hack. And once a cyber player is in your system from home, they can cause all sorts of havoc once they access your firm's systems. So, I think it's just the start. A lot of companies probably aren't even telling anyone that they've been attacked. It's only the bigger ones that they can't hide it. So, one wonders what the statistics really are around ransomware and those type of attacks that aren't publicized. But I think you're going to see a lot more of it happening, because if they don't pay up, then the systems will be shut down, and that will start having a corresponding impact on the normal person in the street.
Mm-hmm. Let's try to be a little bit optimistic if we can. You mentioned this already. We talked previously about this executive order that was passed just this last week. I think it was Thursday or Friday by the Biden administration in response to this whole Colonial pipeline thing. It is a lengthy order. It is not super easy reading, but within it, I think there's some really key points which I think add value to the industry, and hopefully coming from the US will translate into solid action that can protect organizations, individuals. One, which I like to see, is very much about talking about zero trust. And really taking that and zero trust network architecture and making sure that this is something that businesses and the private sector are using. And this, it's been a buzzword, it's been flying around for a while, but I think it is encouraging to see that come from the highest level to hopefully be adopted as much as possible where things are connected with the government, and then that being the way forward. Again, it is not a guarantee. And I think the magic here is that, not magic, but the key point is that Biden will not now fix and make everything secure, right? Because everyone's now thinking, oh, now we have this, now we'll be safe. Well, no, this is always to mitigate attacks, right? You can never be 100% secure. That's the main thing. And I think that's the wrong message people are looking for. And as consumers anywhere, they're like, okay, now I'm safe. That's not how it works. Do you think that, are you optimistic with this now? What's the timeline with this executive order?
I would, Sascha, I'd almost have a bit of a joke there and say, because zero trust is the cornerstone of, Fudo's security solution, that Fudo had something to do with the drafting of the executive order. But we know that didn't happen. But it does make the phrase plays right into the product offering that Fudo has. But I think when you look at any type of executive order or regulation, it's not instantaneous. It takes time. And by time, I mean, it can be months or it can be years until you see it all come to fruition. What I think should happen in this type of scenario is that you get government and you get business working hand in hand to try and ensure that there aren't any unintended consequences from the implementation of any regulation that has a negative impact on the market, but that they come together and they form a coherent strategy, because often it's nation players. You know, they often say that some of these cybersecurity agents are being harbored by governments. So you've got to make sure that from that perspective, that from a political angle, that can be dealt with. But at the same time, business can't sit back and say, well, you know, we're going to wipe our hands of this. The government is going to look after us, because that will never happen. You know, they can give guidance to the industry, but at the end of the day, the industry has to look after itself. And I think that comes in a number of forms. And, you know, as you mentioned earlier, when we were talking before the podcast, you know, there's been new research that's come out that said, you know, some 85% of incidents are human related or originate there. So, you know, if you look at firms, you've got to get stricter and stronger passwords in place. You've got to educate your employees about the threats that are in the landscape out there. You've got to put secure systems in place to monitor and capture this. But it's all very well having it in place, but you've then got to ensure that they are operating and they're doing what they intended to do. You can't just plug it in and let it play in the background and expect that it's going to save you. Because every day there are new threats coming out from different angles. So you've got to ensure that your platform is secure. And then you've also probably got to run simulated attacks against your own environment to make sure that you protect it. You know, a great thing that I learned from my time as a compliance officer was that if a regulator found a firm to be doing something untoward or had a lax control, you would look at that and go, right, let's have a look at our own landscape and make sure that we aren't suffering the same fate. You know, it's almost like a free pass, because you get an opportunity to review your own landscape, fix what's there before the regulator comes knocking on your door. And the last thing we need here in this environment is a cybersecurity regulator that starts walking around telling firms that they're not doing what they should be doing. So that's my kind of take on it. And I think it's you know, it's an evolving landscape, and it's going to continue to evolve.
Well, as I like the point you mentioned, it's about continuous training. And I think still at this point, we realize that not everyone is up to the basics, right? The foundational principles in many ways. And if we look in the Colonial pipeline or perhaps other ransomware attacks, it is not simply the fact, although some attacks are very sophisticated, that the attacks are, you know, made by some geniuses, right? I mean, in many cases, as you mentioned earlier, it's about doing or failing to do the simple things. The Verizon data breach report just came out from 2021 from last week. As you said, 85% of breaches are due to human interaction failure or errors. So be that negligence, it doesn't always have to be someone who has malicious intent. It could just simply be negligence. As I'm sure that once the forensics and everything is finished with Colonial Pipeline, we'll kind of see, I don't know if they'll release it, but hopefully we'll see some kind of lessons to be learned. That's one thing I don't know, kind of will maybe perhaps disagree with you on from the executive order from last week. It seems to be very much that we will see a kind of official board, a review board, much like you had for the airlines, or rather that you have for airlines. You know, if something happens in the United States, there's an airline crash, federal agency steps in, there's a review board to check what's happened to find fault. I think the important point is not to now go to the population and say nothing will ever happen, but if it does, we can mitigate this. And if something does happen, we can learn from it and you know, hold those to account that need to be held to account, because as we said, it's mostly going to be human negligence. I'd
agree with you on that point. My only fear around this is that review boards can take a period of time or length of time to, you know, they convene, they do their review, and then they come out with their findings. These threat players are very nimble and can change very quickly. So it can come out with a great finding, and we can all work out what exactly happened and transpired. And they can probably mandate that you need to put these minimum standards in place. But But I think you're going to have to be more nimble than that to ensure that you don't fall a victim to another attack that's kind of has evolved, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, it's not going to be a silver bullet by any means, but I think the more kind of, let's say, public and the more control we have, and let's say the overview grows, and let's say the idea that government, I don't know if government can ever be nimble. Maybe possible, this about compliance. But the more we have this, the more of a focus we have from the top, I think is a good thing. Generally, I think that will be a good thing. As you said, how nimble can they be? How long will this take? Probably a considerable amount of time. Absolutely. Private industry needs to step in, needs to do a lot. But when we talk about private industry, I think we also need to talk about the general population, right? The way we work has changed, continues to change. So therefore, the office, the remote work, it was already hard ensuring and guaranteeing security in the office. Now that's completely just turned upside down as, networks are insecure, that passwords aren't changed, that certain things, there's a lot of lateral movement possible. So this also needs to be addressed. And this, I think, the individual user needs to also make sure that they are part of the greater way of making sure things are safer, right? And it's okay not to know everything, but I think it starts also, it's not a top-down approach fully, as it is very much what I like call it should be a squeeze. It should come from the bottom and from the top, and we all kind of meet in the middle and have our road to a safer and more secure environment of how we work, how we engage. Look, great topics. We should talk about this more. We will talk about it some more.
Yeah, I think so.
Andrzej, thank you so much for your time. From Cybershure, one of our Fudo Security partners in sunny South Africa, I believe. So have a wonderful day. Thanks for your insight.
Thank you very much, Sascha.